Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in. And this is another episode of the Psychedelic Integration Compass. Today with us we have Estella Star. Estella is an intuitive guide, dance facilitator, and community creator with over 20 years of experience supporting people in healing and recovery. Through movement, yoga, and deep connection to nature and ancestral roots, she helps others reconnect with themselves and find freedom from old patterns. So I'm really happy that Estella is with us today. Hi, Estella. How are you doing?
Hey Clara, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me on. Excited to be here.
Very excited to have you as well. Yes, so tell us how you came into this path, into intuitive healing, guiding, using embodiment, and I'm interested. We will be talking about also how that led to the integration work as well. But tell us first your how you stepped into it.
I think it's a journey, and it's all about that kind of inner voice and that intuitive voice that starts to niggle away at you, knowing that there's something out there that is more than what you have been led to believe, or you know what you've been told, what you've been taught as you're growing up, and realizing that there's a part of you that hasn't really fully been listening to your path. And I feel that when we are on a path of purpose, your soul at some point is going to gently remind you of that. And I started to become curious of what else there was out there in the world. And nature, I've always been really drawn to being outside, being amongst the trees, being by the sea. My family, um, my father especially, is by the sea, and so we went there a lot as children, and it was something that I really enjoyed. I could be out in nature for hours and hours and hours without any thought, just totally, totally present. And that was where I felt at my most happiest. And I guess that never, ever left me. So then coming into a world and a society that is a bit more regimented, in that you go to school, you go to college, you go to work, you earn money, you have a house, you do these things that seem the norm, felt actually very disconnecting for me, and they felt disconnecting for a long time. So there was a real niggle inside of me to, I guess, go outside of the box, outside of what the experience, if you like, of the Truman Show, knowing that there's more to this life, but couldn't quite see it. And started to read a lot of articles about plants and psychedelic plants, plant medicine, and became very, very curious of that world. And then I explored that a little bit more. I felt that there was a deeper inner calling to find out what this other world was, that took me more deeper into nature, deeper into the spirit of nature's call, if you like.
So that niggle and that deep connection that you had and that niggle that you felt, I'm curious to know if there was any kind of struggle or crisis that then brought you deeper into it. Because usually when I'm, talking to people, this search for the deeper self, for something deeper in life, that deeper part of ourselves starts out of a struggle. And I'm curious to know, and it might not be, it might be that it gradually kind of came about and it naturally came to you. I'm just curious to know about that journey.
Definitely, there was definitely a struggle in my teenage years, that hit quite suddenly, and quite drastically, when I was 12 and we were living in Spain. And my father's addiction and alcoholism got really quite bad. And there was violence involved. And so we had to move, we had to leave, and we had to come back to the UK. And in those moments, everything kind of fell apart. Homelessness and addiction came in quite strong within the family dynamic. And there was a lot of chaos at that time. And I didn't see my father then for many, many, many years after that. And this is stuff that I've dealt with now, obviously, but it played a huge part. And I became very defiant and very kind of this world, very like, what is this? What is this all about? And why am I here? And I just rebelled so much as a teenager, and actually was my first experience of psychedelics, because I guess at that time it felt like such a destruction in my life. The loss of everything felt so extreme, from losing my home to sleeping on couches to not having a father around to just chaos in the home and no real solid foundation. I just went out there in the world and started to, create this discovery for myself. And actually, one of those was through LSD. And I became very aware that there was another side to life, but it was very much on a recreational basis. There was no intention behind it. But yeah, it did show me that there was another life out there, I guess. And we'll probably come to that. It kind of links in quite nicely with the idea of integration as well, and what that actually means, because I certainly did not integrate those experiences at all. But yeah, I would say that was a big struggle at that time, and it definitely led me deeper into my discovery of what I'm doing today.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so again, now we are at a point in your story where what was the turning point then, from this maybe recreational exploration that didn't have certain levels of awareness and consciousness to it? Obviously, it's not just the growing up phase, that maybe you're not a teenager anymore, but I wonder what was the turning point when it became more conscious and it became more of a healing path, and something that you were doing more intentionally.
Yeah, I became quite ill quite early on in my life. In my sort of late teens, early 20s. I probably would say it was one of the worst health points of my life, especially around addiction and just like a deep suffering, really quite bad depression, and just really not understanding my purpose in life. I was a very anxious person. And this took me on. I kind of remember thinking to myself, well, what can I do? What can I do in life that's going to give me some sort of purpose? And I turned to nutrition and started to learn more about that. And then by the time I was sort of 26, I started to delve even more deeper. Now, that wasn't the end of my suffering, but it was certainly the beginning of my journey in regards to looking at alternative ways to live a better and more healthier lifestyle.
So again, another maybe crisis point in life, like, health issues and as you said, other patterns that came along with it. And yeah, it's interesting kind of to think about how really from the struggle you can get, it's true that you can really get the deepest growth sometimes if you engage with it intentionally. And it's so much about also readiness and being ready to do that too. And so yeah, I'd like to know now that we got to that stage of your journey. Um, what practices did you explore, and when did you then finally got to, because we're going to be talking about plant medicine, obviously, and psychedelic medicine, how that journey started for you as well? I know that you did it recreationally, but how did the healing journey with it start? And also, how did it develop?
There are many moving parts to this from the age of 26 to about 33. And that in that time there were so many different kind of pathways. But it really started for me in looking at nutrition and getting really quite into the idea of juicing and juicing fruits and vegetables and all of that for our health. And I started to follow somebody, a guy called Jason Vale, who's very much in this world of like juicing and nutrition, and he very much spoke about it for like addiction and things like that as well. So that really, that really, I really believed in that, and it really helped me. There's no doubt about that. It helped me in my life at that time. And then I started to study in fitness. I became a fitness instructor. I studied as a personal trainer, and then I started teaching things like boxercise, outdoor fitness, and yeah, I worked in a gym for quite a while, and I started to, yeah, really get into it that way. However, and there is a big however to this, in that period of time, my soul was dying. Absolutely. I was keeping my head above water with the body aspect of it, but I hadn't dealt with all the things that had happened to me, as a teenager, and all the destruction that came with that. And there was a lot of destruction, and I hadn't dealt with any of it. So I was emotionally still really struggling, and I didn't actually know how to regulate my emotions at all. So whilst on the outside it seemed like I was doing quite well, I was going to the gym, I was running marathons, I was doing all sorts, from the outside I was it was a very functional thing. But I really, when I closed that door, I was very depressed still, and I was still really struggling with my emotions, and I still felt lost actually. And then I went on this juicing retreat, and it was actually Jason Vale's juicing retreat. My nan passed away, and there was some inheritance money, and my mum wanted to make sure that she could see that I was going in a downward spiral, and I was still going out drinking quite heavily at the weekends, using cocaine and things like that, even whilst I was in the fitness world. It's a thing, and it happens a lot actually. And yeah, and so I was hiding, if you like. I was putting on a mask all the time. But I didn't want to put on that mask. It was just the way that my life, it felt like I became an expert at putting on that mask. And yeah, so I went to this retreat, and it was all juicing for 7 days. And Jason Vale was actually conducting, and on this retreat, because my mum paid extra for us to go on, and I say us because it was me and my partner at the time, to go on this particular retreat, because she knew that I was struggling, and she knew that there were things going on, and she so desperately wanted to help me. And honestly, it was definitely the start of a big change for me. There was a yoga teacher on there called Kenny, and I just was hooked. I got up every morning, did meditation with him, did Ashtanga yoga. I really felt connected to this aspect of yoga in such a deep way. It was almost like everything that I was looking for, but I didn't know that I was looking for it. And in the stillness of that retreat, where there were no other distractions, I was able to actually hear my soul a little bit more. Whereas, I wasn't able to do that before. I was a working mum in active addiction, if you like, and just about coping, putting on the masks. And this allowed me to take off the mask for a moment. I wasn't drinking. There was you wasn't allowed any of that stuff. So it was like a pure sort of detox. The first holiday, or time away I'd been without a drink, without needing to have a drink. And it really changed my life, changed the course of my life. It wasn't the end of my addiction at this point, but it certainly got me to realize I had an addiction, whereas I was in quite a bit of denial before that. And Jason Vale took us on this. I can't actually remember the title of it now, but he took us on this journey, hypnosis type of journey, from where you are now to where you could be in 10 years' time if you carry on as you are. And we like kind of magic carpet journey. And the emotions that I felt were like emotions I'd never experienced before. And I was devastated that if I carried on in my life as I was at that moment, how devastating that would actually be in 10 years' time. To then he took us on the scenario of 10 years' time, what if you changed your life and what would that look like? And that was, I mean, we're going back, this is about 15 years ago now. This was like 31. I was about 31. No, 32. So I was, like shocked by this because it was like my subconscious playing out without me being in control of it, which I'd never managed to do before because I was always trying to be in control of my life. So yeah, that was a big turning point then. And then within that 2 year gap was when I came back from that retreat, and actually my addictions didn't get better, they got worse. And then 2 years after that, I hit a huge rock bottom, and that's when life really did change for me.
Okay, wow. Yeah, so much happening, and I was listening and thinking, how often does that happen? That on the surface we're doing all the things where it looks like we totally have it, we've got it, and then our soul is suffering. There's no connection. There's no really clear connection there to something deeper. And then I believe that's why then the addictions or the patterns, even if they're not addictive patterns, as in substances, but other kind of addictive patterns carry on until we address that deeper part. And it sounds like that yoga juicing retreat is such a magical job with you, and there's so much to say about being able to listen yourself as well. That's the thing, is sometimes it's just never quite enough to really listen to what's inside. And we create that situation. We don't want to listen sometimes, because then once that you listened, you can't unlisten. And then if you don't do anything about it, you know that you know actually what needs to be done as well. So, but yeah, I just listened to quite a few points of what you were saying, and it must be for many people, such a common journey to kind of have that realization that actually, and I really love as well this journey that this guy, I can't remember his name, but the guy from the Juicing Retreat is taking you, through, because yeah, imagine if you carry on the same way, and then imagine if you change. And I believe in the creative power of the imagination so much that if you can imagine change as well, as of course it's possible for you. And the same is said for the other thing, that, you can put your attention and energy towards the direction that's good for you, or just let things unfold as they are. So, yeah. So how did you then transfer all this into the work with plant medicine? How did the conscious work with plant medicine come about?
Yeah, so my love for yoga, and because I was already in the fitness industry, I did a yoga teacher training course. That felt the most obvious way to go. And I had already started recovery. So I'd already gone into 12-step recovery programs, because I didn't really know what other solutions there were out there. And I'd hit such a rock bottom that, my mother led me there and just said, look, give it a go. What else have you got to lose? And at that point, I didn't. And that kind of got me on that journey. And I became sober. I became sober, and I started to be a bit more open to life and what it had to offer. But again, still feeling that kind of needing I knew I was looking for that depth. And so when I started my yoga teacher training, it ticked so many boxes for me, because I was learning about the philosophy and, Patanjali's ways, and it felt really connecting for me, especially for somebody that was in recovery at this stage. And And then I guess from that, really, I started to get curious about plant medicines. My curiosity probably was, around 3 years of of that. And then I'd actually started up a yoga. So I'd started up a yoga studio and a juice bar because I was passionate about these things. I was like, yoga's going to change the world. I felt so passionate. I was so passionate about juicing as well. And I opened up this yoga studio and juice bar. And again, with great, I sound like I've done that easily, like I haven't. It was with it was with great struggle, and I had no money. My parents didn't have money to give me at that time, so um, it was something I did. It was a venture I went on, and I got a business loan, and I just felt so passionate about doing this, and I really wanted to help other people going through recovery, and that became my, I guess that passion overrid the difficulty of actually running a business. And I was a bit naive. I had no idea what I was really doing and the actual difficulties that came with running a business. So I definitely got a crash course. It was kind of mental, but it was amazing as well. And it really did bring a community of people together that I'm very much in connection with today. So there was a lot that came from me doing that. Um, and then on that journey and having a studio, many teachers, different teachers came along. You imagine all the different teachers and different people that I met through this journey. I mean, it was incredible. I mean, there's a whole book in that, let alone a podcast. It was such an incredible journey and the people that I met and the journey that it brought me on today. So that was such a big calling, that yoga studio and juice bar. It was way more than that. It was the connections that came from that. And I did my yoga and mindfulness for addiction course, and I met people, and I started to do all these different courses because all the teachers wanted to use the studio, and I got the beautiful opportunity to sit in to these courses. And I met somebody also, a lady who co-wrote a book called The Ancestral Continuum, the key to unlocking your um and it's there. Wow, look at that. I forgot the name, and then it's actually here. So that, yeah, unlock the secrets of who you really are. And at this point, I was really on this path of wanting to connect more deeply to who I really was. So I read this book and it blew me away. I'm really conscious of not going off in a tangent to different directions, but it really blew me away, this book. It opened up that door for me. There's no doubt about that. It opened me up to going beyond the physical. And and that's when I really started to take notice of this other realm, if you like, that possibly could be existing amongst us. And yeah, so I also met another lady there, and she started to talk about plant medicines, and my whole being just lit up. I was like, what is this? Like my soul was like, yes, yes, yes. Um, and she was going to South America, and she was on this journey, and she was going to go and take ayahuasca and wachuma and all that. And she was like the only person that I knew at this time that was like on that path. And I just followed her path with such awe. And then she said, now I'm going to be co-hosting with somebody else, and holding space for a retreat with ayahuasca and wachuma. And I went, I'm there, I'm doing it, I'm on this path. Yeah. And I ended up, do you know what? I'll be honest, I can't remember how many years ago that was. Maybe eight, between eight and no, I'm going to say even 9 years ago, maybe. Um, and it totally changed my life. It was undoubtedly one of the most beautiful and one of the most difficult experiences, because it broke everything down. But that's how my journey started with plant medicine.
So I'd like to know more about that, how it broke everything down as well for someone who'd already done quite a lot of, inner work with yoga, with meditation, with everything that you mentioned. So yeah, I'm quite interested in knowing from that point of view, having done quite a lot of inner work already, and then going and taking plant medicine, and also obviously informing yourself quite well before doing it. Um, Maybe tell us kind of a few anecdotes from your first experience, like your first meeting as well, because that's such an important one. And then, yeah, after that, I also wanted to ask you how um, plant medicine work connects to recovery work specifically, because you worked personally with it. So, but let's kind of like go back into the first question first, is like yeah, what happened your first time?
I'm not shy of talking about this. I would say that this is a story that I speak about quite a lot, because it was it was the thing that unlocked everything, for me. And I would say that the most, don't get me wrong, I definitely, there was just like really big realizations, and they almost seemed obvious, but it was embodied. It was something that came through so much more embodied than just the knowing of it. And I feel that I was living in the knowing of it, but didn't quite truly know how that felt. And I feel that the plant medicines bring it into cellular aspect. And it was like the emotions. Whoa, like what are these? I'll be honest, when I first went into recovery and started to learn about and identifying with my emotions, it was a very, I guess, coherent thing. It was like, okay, you're feeling like this, now identify it with, like, really, it was like learning to be at school, like to learn my emotions. Like, how are you feeling today? Because I couldn't identify how I was feeling. My emotions were all over the place. I never had that emotional stability, really growing up, especially in my teenage years when you're already all over the place anyway. And I realized there was I had not regulated these emotions. So just to identify them was something I was trying to do anyway. So when I was in the plant medicine, it just brought all these emotions to the surface. And then I started to understand what my emotions were. Like, okay, these are my emotions, and I just felt such a deep grief. It's the only way to describe it. And it felt like a grief for everything, a grief for Mother Earth, a grief for my womb, a grief for my children, a grief for my parents and what they went through. I just felt everybody's grief. And I realized that I had been carrying this for so long, but I had been pushing it away for so long as well. I just didn't want to acknowledge it. It was too painful to acknowledge it. I was in so much pain. And I could not push this pain down anymore. The plants were like, no, this pain, it needs to come up. It needs to be seen. And that was overwhelming. That felt really overwhelming. But I was in the best place. I was being held well. There were beautiful people there that were holding me, and and just I kept saying sorry for my emotions. You don't need to be sorry, but I just felt so, what is this? And I felt so bad almost. It felt like that I was burdening people. So I was carrying around that burden really for so long. And that's where those masks were coming from. I didn't want to burden anybody with my problems. And that came through in the plant ceremony. And so, I mean, there were many things. I remember falling on my knees in ayahuasca going, the journey continues. Like, obvious, but at that point it's just like there is no end, there is no end to this journey. And yet I was looking for an outcome all the time over there, well, completed it, journey done. And it was like, no, the journey continues. These are layers upon layers upon layers.
Okay, so talking about layers, and your journey, what do you think then helped you with the integration of that very journey? Let's focus on the first one, right? As we're talking about that, and usually those are the journeys that we remember the most. the journey during which maybe we don't know even that much about integration and the value of integration. We don't know where to go to for it. We don't really know, you know, people that feel like, like the right match to do integration with. And what, I mean, I'm just thinking about myself. I just didn't understand the value of it. I didn't understand what it was at the very beginning. It took me a little while. It took me quite a few ceremonies to realize, okay, there's so much more that I can do with this work with plant medicine that I'm doing in ceremony. So, yeah, I'd like to know what helped you. What do you think helped you with the integration, and then, then eventually took you to the path of like doing integration all the time.
I didn't know any other way. So if you like, I'd already been in the wellness field for a long time. So I just used that to integrate really. I feel I remember really picking up on that at the time and kind of observing, if you like, the group that I was with and almost feeling quite taken back, but that they weren't or didn't have any of these practices beforehand before going into plant ceremony. And so I guess I've never had the experience of going into something so deep without already having practices and a way of living that was already helping me, my recovery, my yoga, my meditation, all these things healthy eating, that kind of stuff. Because I remember when the ceremonies were finished and we were like getting driven back to the airport, for me, it was still really important to eat well, to still look after my body. And everybody was like buying chocolate and really bad junk food. And I couldn't fathom that. I was like, why are they doing this? That seems really odd. Um, so I guess because I already had a practice and already had an understanding of looking after my mind and my body, that it felt obvious to me that you would do that after a plant ceremony and that you would keep that practice going.
Yeah, so digging deeper into this and through the practices that you already had in place, what beliefs do you think you shifted at the time? So obviously this journey showed you, first reconnect you very deeply with your emotions. As hard as it was, a lot came up. So at a deeper level, what was the shift in belief system that you had, and in the ways in which also potentially you identified yourself, because that's so connected. And talking about that deeper part, also, how did that journey bring you closer to your soul, to that deeper part of yourself?
It gave me a lot of faith, actually. It took me into a world that I already knew existed, that I totally didn't believe existed. So the idea of that's my experience anyway, is because obviously I was saying before about when I was a teenager and doing LSD and recognizing that there's more to life than what we're living. Um, the deeper aspect of it in talking about belief systems was not being scared to go there, actually. And I was brought up as a Christian. So it was very much, you do not go there because you are going to let the devil in, and that's that. So I was actually quite scared of that world a little bit. And so really it was about bringing my faith more deeper into God and the meaning of that without it being distorted by any kind of doctrination. And I would say that that was a big shift in my belief and actually having more faith and trust in myself as creation would lead me to believe that I'm here for greater things and that I can believe in myself. But I would say that that has been probably one of the biggest journeys. I think the shift in believing myself, but also recognizing that that's been a journey since.
I can really relate to that because I've been brought up as a Catholic too, and there's places in the invisible that we should never go to, and where everything happens in the invisible before it becomes materialized, right? So, and this kind of like plant medicines, and generally I would say transformative experiences. trance state can really kind of, lift the veil in such a way that, of course, they need to be done, a certain setting, so important, done in a safe container with also people that can, you know, uh, guide you or anyway protect the container as much as you need to protect yourself with your own self-care and everything else. It's that would shift the belief system quite drastically, right? And I like how you linked it, and I think this is so important. I think it's at the core of what plant medicine can really help in terms of healing is connecting to something deeper and bigger as well than just yourself. And it gives you such a sense of belonging as well. It can heal so many different patterns. And you talked about self-trust, and it's a huge thing. It's what when things are not going well, I tend to kind of lose trust in myself and life, and regaining that through a sense of interconnectedness to everything can be so, so profound and healing. And then I guess the challenge is to be able to reconnect to that again after the ceremony. And that's where we get into integration, not let it fade away as a memory, but actually reinforce the neural pathway that was created through that connect. 'Cause it's also very, very kind of organic and very much in the body. So we experience that. And as we have that experience of the infinite and unconditional love and a connection to creation, we create pathways in our brain. We create an energetic connection through the body that can be reinforced afterwards through various practices and through the integration process. So yeah, I there's so much there in what you said, and it starts as the belief, but then what does the belief shift? What doors does that open? And I'm curious to know, what doors did it open for you?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question. I have a friend, and we always talk about the doors opening and that shift, and walking through that shift is opening, those doors to other things. And I would say that, the journey then with plant medicine continued for me. And it continued into also being, and I guess the intuitive aspect of being on a path and trusting that and surrendering to that without being scared, but also having discernment as well. And you only learn that through doing it, really, if I'm honest. We can tell people, or I can tell myself, have discernment. We can only know until we're there. And it allows us a beautiful opportunity to really understand what's going on inside of our own bodies and how that feels. And what this allowed me to do by continuing on that journey is to be the observer, be the observer of what's going on in these environments and what holding space even means. Just being the observer in these places and actually understanding what it means to kind of hold space and then integrate this experience after, and actually how different it is for each individual person, depending on what life experiences you've already had, what practices you already have in place, how new you are to these kind of environments. And so I realized then that there were so many different layers to this. How did it, I guess, integrate into my recovery was an interesting one, because actually a lot of people within these kind of 12-step meetings they actually have a bit of a, not all of them, but from my experience at this time, it was just another form of drugs. So it was actually probably not best not to go there, because you could essentially get addicted to these kind of ways as well, and it's becoming a reliance. Interesting, definitely, but there are so many different takes on that. And yes, that can be one way to look at it. And I guess this is why it is important to do integration work and understand what integration work even means.
Totally. And I'm curious to know what your take is on that, because that's something that I've heard from many people. Many people come to plant medicine in the attempt of dealing with an addiction, whether it is food, whether it is a substance, whether it is anything, gambling, whatever it is. But especially the people that are coming from a substance addiction, a lot of the time they're like, well, am I just replacing, one addiction for potentially another one? And I'd like to know your take on it because I think they did some experiments that, that demonstrated it's actually, you can't really get addicted to, for example, LSD or plant medicine, but there can definitely be an element of addiction to the experience. That's for sure. And I've seen it myself. And that's why I got into integration because I think the whole experience is not just the taking the medicine and the healing, there is the community around it and the music, depending on which tribe you're working with as well. There's an element of being in community and listening to music. It can also become a bypass. That's the thing. And that's why, integration is important because you could be going and taking medicine and really not doing much with what came up. And that could feed into a loop of addiction to something new where you're telling yourself a story that you're doing the deeper work for yourself, that you are looking at yourself deeply, but you're not. So what are your thoughts on this?
I would say that it is very difficult to get addicted to to plant medicine. However, I have seen it as well. So I don't want to deny that that does exist. I have seen people going to do 30 ayahuasca ceremonies because they're chasing an outcome. They're chasing something that they maybe received at the beginning. They're looking for that. They're still looking for that reconnection. And ultimately, that's what so many of us are doing. We feel disconnected to life. And plants, I guess, can bring you that sense of connection, whether it's the community, whether it's the environment, whether it's the songs, whether it's nature. There is just something about being in those places that make you go, oh, okay, and you feel a sense of belonging. You feel a sense of belonging with the people, with what you're doing, with yourself. And I guess maybe the chase is that, the chase is looking for that sense of belonging. And a lot of the time, we come into these ceremonies, we come into these places, and we go back into normal life. We go back to our families, we go back to maybe some jobs, and we want to change those. People want to change those, but actually find it very difficult to do and integrate back. So they go, well, I'll just keep going to a plant medicine because that's where I feel like I belong. That's where I feel like I can be more myself and discover aspects of myself. And they have these big sudden revelations and realizations, and life is going to change. And of course, you never see life in the same way, but actually, how that can be challenging in itself. And this needs to be taken into consideration when going into plant medicine ceremonies.
I agree to that. Really agree with it. And so yeah, then now we are getting back into the integration work. How do you create that sense of belonging outside of the ceremony? Do you actually believe that's possible as well? Because so much has to do with belief systems, and potentially when I'm thinking about this, like what could happen is that where you do see clues of belonging outside of the ceremony, how can you anchor that? Because we just notice what doesn't work and what is really, disaligned. But what about, focusing a little bit more on what's already aligned, already working, you know, outside of the ceremony, and then bring some of that insight and those revelations and that wisdom that you experienced in ceremony into that. And so talking about this, like I like to kind of talk a little bit more about what you do now, how that feeds into this process of cultivating that inner wisdom that's already there, because plant medicine again, and I've said this in other episodes, it's like the medicines only connect you to something that's already inside of you. They're connectors, really, and that wisdom is always there. So how do we take that journey? What's been your experience of taking that journey yourself? And I know you mentioned about yoga, meditation, but especially after plant medicine, and how have you taken other people through that experience too?
Community is at the heart of everything that I do, and I really feel that we are all part of this mycelium network, and we are all interweaving, and we are all in co-creation. And this was a big catalyst to me creating big community events. So I would say definitely after my plant medicine experience, I felt a sense of loneliness in the world that I was in outside of that. And I wanted to try and recreate this community. And that's what I did. I started conscious dance events before they became as popular as they are now. Um, and it was something that felt really important to me. And then as I started to cultivate the idea of working with plant medicines, I wanted to make sure that people could stay in community, and that this would be one way, of doing that. And that's continued on. It's continued on to a festival, and having these co-creations. I really feel that you are merging your life in the plant medicine world in the world that you live in. You're starting to merge the two. There is no separation. It's like separating the roots from the tree. You can't. They are as one. And we are the same. And once we recognize that we are nature, and if we start to operate more as this natural way of being, this cyclical way of being, and we bring that into the idea of community, we are all feeding each other, and everyone has what somebody else needs. And one way of looking at it is, I really like Dr. Bruce Lipton's take on it, is inside of our bodies, we are a community of cells, and they all tell each other what to do and how to, that one, these cells tell those cells what to do, and it helps us to function. But these cells, they need each other. And we feed them though, we give them good water, good food, and they actually respond well to that. And much like a community, much like us as people. And that's why we're seeing so many more community events coming up now.
I really love that metaphor, of the cells within the body, and how healing is that, and how it's our natural setup to have that within us and outside of us as well. So, talking about it, tell us a little bit more about your current offering. And I know there is a festival as well that's coming soon, talking about community. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Thanks for bringing that into being, because I have been a little bit, sort of, yeah, I've been integrating myself the last year, actually. And the festival was not on this year because of that. And it's been an amazing journey of integration this year. It's allowed me to take a step back, evaluate, be able to be the observer again, rather than sometimes when you're in it, it's very difficult to see what's going on. So to be able to take a step back and actually have a look at how, what it even is, what it means. And because of that, it's it's potentially it's on the cards. It's like 95% there. It's not out in the public yet, but it will come back next year, in August 2026. What I'm doing right now is very much in line with the idea of the integration, and I am holding a retreat in Portugal on the 18th to the 22nd of October called the Autumnal Integration Retreat, to give us and allow us an opportunity. One of my biggest forms of medicine is movement, and I run now a lot of movement events, music. I feel that it plays a huge part in our healing. So yeah, I will be bringing that in. We'll be bringing the Tamascal in, the Sweat Lodge. Sweat Lodge has been a big medicine for me over the years. And yoga, yeah, the philosophy, going into more of a space of relaxation. When we're relaxed, when our nervous system is relaxed, we can hear ourselves more, you know. We can hear what's actually going on. We can hear that inner voice, and we can hear our intuition more. So that is what's coming up in October.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Let's see what happens as well with the festival and everything else. You're going to be able to find all the details, the social media links, Estella's social media links in the description of this episode. So thank you so much, Estella, for today.
Thank you, Clara. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed this talk. So thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And likewise, I really enjoyed it too. And I hope that our listeners have found it somehow useful and interesting. Maybe some points that they can take back into their lives as well when working with plant medicine and integration. Thank you, everyone, for listening. And I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for joining us today on the Psychedelic Integration Compass. If you enjoyed the episode, remember to like the video and subscribe to the newsletter to stay updated on what's coming next. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.